19th of February 1942. Arc light flickers over gray steel. Otto Feldmann stands by the hull welding jigs at the Krupp plant, a shop mechanic with little say. Stacks of plates wait. The backlog presses in because more tanks are demanded each week, and the line crawls. He watches the bevelers shave edges and the welders lay multipass butt seams, one slow layer after another. He can see where the time leaks. His goal is simple: cut the hours without loosening a joint that has to stop a shell. In his head, a new edge shape and a tighter jig sequence click into place. He decides to try it on live work, against the design protocol stamped on the drawings, and moves his torch to the first seam. He keeps a tally in his head as the day drags. Hulls wait on pallets with chalk dates aging on their sides. The line does not stop because feed plates are missing. It stops because each thick edge takes too long to make and too long to join. He watches one plate leave the beveler with a clean V, then wait because the crane is tied up. He watches a welder start a pass, chip, start again, chip again. Minutes bleed away in starts and stops. He slips a small pocket watch from his coat and notes spans with his thumb, then returns it before anyone sees. He writes the losses in his small book that night with the stub of a carpenter's pencil. Beveling queues cost hours because one grinder feeds many stations. Repositioning for each pass calls the crane, and the crane man is always busy. Every stop to change rod or clean slag brings a new arc strike that dumps heat in a new spot and twists the plates more. The twist is paid for later by men with torches and jacks, drawing lines of heat to pull the steel back, sometimes twice when the last pass throws it again. Each step is reasonable alone. Together they make the backlog. He draws an edge in profile, then rubs it out and draws a new one. A simple lap would be fast to make but weak in peel. He draws a step instead, a shallow offset on one plate and a matching rebate on the other. The top edge sits on a shelf. Not in a wide V, the faces touch under clamp pressure and hold themselves. He keeps the step small, a fraction of the plate thickness, so the shear path stays long and the load flows through meat, not just the weld. He keeps it square so the machinists can make it with the same tools. He writes a note to himself: self-hold under clamp, no drift. He thinks through how to run the fire. Many short starts put in spikes of heat that kick the seam out of line. One continuous run will carry heat evenly if the puddle is kept small. He plans to strike at the dead end and drag in one sweep. No pause at the middle plates, no big weave, just enough to tie the root and the corner. He writes down a slower travel and a tighter arc to keep the pool from falling. He marks the bead path with an arrow on his sketch from one end of the step to the other. Fewer starts, fewer kicks, fewer corrections. He looks at the big hull jig and thinks how to make it hold his steps without a new build. The shop has bins of angle, blocks, and clamps that the fitters use for odd work. He finds a piece of thick angle iron and drills 2 holes so it can sit against the jig face and set the plate at the right offset. He makes a small stop block that kisses the edge of the opposite plate. If anyone asks, they look like helper pieces, not a change in method. He files the burrs smooth so they seat right, then wipes them with oil and hangs them under the platform until the foreman walks away. He works the trial on the night shift when the plant is hollow and the noise is thinner. He chooses an inner web where an armor bulkhead meets a cross member. If it fails, the outside plates will still carry the hull. He pushes the plate against his angle, eases the other into the step, and hears the dull click when the faces meet. He clamps hard and looks along the edge. The straight line tells him the step is holding on its own. He pulls the torch light over his shoulder, strikes and moves. The bead runs clean. He does not stop at the old stitch marks. He keeps one puddle, one breath. He feels when the heat wants to run away and shortens his arc. When he closes the end, he clicks the watch. Half the minutes of the old method sit on the face of the watch instead of the plate. He tacks a small test strip to the same plate and makes a short seam with the same settings. After it cools, he cuts 2 coupons with a hacksaw and marks them in chalk. At the bench, he clamps the first one in a vise and bends it back on itself until the 2 sides meet. The face stretches. He watches for a hairline crack, then hits it with a hammer to see if the brake will start at the toe. It holds. He snaps the second in 2 to see the inside and studies the gray of the metal. He does not see a cold line or a black edge. The weld has fused through the step. He writes down his notes with the time and the strip marks, then wipes the chalk away. He names the shape in his book because he needs a name to track it. He writes Feldmann joint at the top of the page and draws the step with the bead path below it. He adds a small code he can scratch by the seam. 2 tiny nicks at the start and 1 at the end, low on the edge where primer will hide them. It is a private mark that will tell him later which hulls have the step and which do not. If the plant sends one of those hulls to repair, he will know. If an inspector looks with a mirror, the nicks add up to nothing more than a slip of a chisel. He slides the trial hull back into the queue before dawn and wipes his angle and block to clean steel. In the morning, he watches from the far side of the bay while the day crew lifts the hull. The plates sit flatter than usual. The foreman calls for the crane only once to shift a corner. No one asks why the fit-up went fast. He times the next seam from across the floor, counting in his head, and writes the count down when no one watches. The hours he cut in the dark move into the daylight, inside a hull that looks like any other to most eyes. He knows the cut can spread if he keeps it quiet and adds one more small arrow to his sketch, from the single seam on one bulkhead to the rest of the hull. The trouble starts when a quality man runs a hand mirror along an inside seam and sees light where the drawing says there should be a V. He chalks a big X on the hull, clips the traveler out of its pouch, and holds it up like a stop flag. Work around the hull slows. The inspector kneels and scratches at the toe with a scribe. A thin step catches the point. He circles it in blue and writes non-conforming edge prep. Otto watches from the aisle and knows the step is his. He feels the small cuts he made for his own mark like heat in his palm. The foreman comes with the traveler and a metal ruler, pushes the mirror in, and looks for weld station codes. Each seam has a scribed number from the lead man who fit it. The marks walk the foreman back to Otto's bay. A fitter points to the angle iron block hung under the platform. The foreman pulls it down, looks at the extra holes, and sets it on the bench like a bad tool. Plant security arrives with brass badges. The party overseer follows with a small book. They ask who set that stop and who changed the seam. Eyes move toward Otto without words. He knows the private nicks he hid to track his joints now point at him. In a small office by the drawing racks, The inquiry turns formal. A clerk lays the Zeichnung flat and taps the bevel symbol. The DIN page for the pass sequence sits beside it. The charge is simple. He has made an unauthorized change to a structural joint in an armored hull in wartime without a permit. The words "endanger integrity" cross the table like a stamp. He does not argue about the shape he drew. He takes a deep breath, sets his small book down, and places 2 bent coupons and the times he wrote beside it. He explains where he cut them and how he bent them. He points to the time spans. The overseer notes that he lacks any sanction to test work, and that bench coupons are not part of the controlled method. The plant lawyer is called. There is talk of sabotage law and special courts that sit for war economy crimes. The security man bags the helper blocks as evidence and takes his notebook. The overseer writes down the seam number, the plate number, and his name. Otto signs a statement that he deviated from the drawing for speed. He signs because it is true, and because saying no makes no sense when the inspector can touch the step. He thinks of the hard faces on the floor who might be asked to speak. He thinks of his wife counting ration tickets. He hears the line stopping and knows some part of that stoppage will be his. He sits on a bench by the wall while managers walk past him in and out of the conference room. An envelope with a black seal arrives in the hand of a messenger. He sees the eagle on the flap before the door shuts. The party man stands too straight in the hall. Words filter out as people enter and leave. Process simplification, ballistic proof, temporary authority. A secretary carries a single-page circular to the copy desk and brings back 3 stamped sheets. The foreman who had set the angle iron on the bench crosses the hall with one of the sheets and does not meet Otto's eyes. When the door opens for him at last, the charge is not gone, but it has shifted. The plant head explains that a sealed ministry circular has just been read. It directs factories to simplify steps where possible if ballistic integrity is kept, pending a later standard. It shifts the right to sign off such changes from shop foreman to the armaments office, under inspection. The inquiry is frozen while this is tried. His joint will be run as a provisional method because it saves time, but only under control. The same seam he altered will be made in a limited run, with samples pulled and broken, and with an inspector on the platform when he welds. He listens, still expecting a door to shut behind him, and nods once. He signs a non-disclosure sheet that says he will not speak of the method beyond the test team. He signs a paper that puts the design office as the author of any written change. His notebook stays in the security cabinet. His name does not go on the trial documents. A small black bar is stamped on his clock card, which means he is under watch. The angle iron and stop block are entered into the tool list as unnamed aids with a neutral code. When he walks back to the bay, the inspector is already there with a gauge and a fresh traveler with a red stamp that says pilot. He works slower than in the night trial because eyes are close, and a pencil ticks time on a board. He sets the rebate with a go-no-go template the inspector holds. He keeps the arc tight and moves in a single pull while the inspector watches the puddle. The seam closes clean again. A sample plate with the same step is cut and bent on the press. Another is sawn open to see if fusion holds in the corner. A second hull forward web is cut out after cool down and pried apart to see the break. The faces show gray metal without a black line. The inspector writes that down. The crane stands less, the clamps come off sooner, and a tilt that usually calls for a heat line does not appear. He walks home in a line of men at dusk with the sense that a rope has loosened but not gone away. He cannot tell his wife why the day was long. On paper, he did not make the joint. On the floor, he must make it again, many times, while two offices watch. He feels the cost of that trade. Yet he also sees the way the ministry's words have moved the power in the plant. Not from him to the foreman, but past them both to an office that approves faster work if it holds. His private step, pulled into the open, has changed how rules bend. What happens to him now will decide how far that bend can carry the tanks that come after. He spends a quiet hour at a side bench, turning his pocket notes into a single page that someone else can sign. He draws the step in thick pencil with two clear dimensions. He writes the clamp order, the place where the go-no-go template sits, and the weld run from dead end to close, one pull, no breaks. He adds a small box that says when to lift the arc if heat runs, and where to cool if a flange bends. He leaves out his own marks and writes only what a fitter needs to place the plates and what a welder needs to watch in the puddle. The design clerk takes the page, retypes it on a form with the plant logo, and brings it back with the armaments office stamp. He reads every line to make sure the steps sit in the right order, because he knows a wrong word here will become a wrong habit at a platform. He teaches in small groups at night because the platforms are open and the men are less watched. 2 welders at a time, sometimes 3 if a fitter can attend, stand inside a hull while he sets the angle stop and the little block where the rebate must land. He shows them where his left hand grips the torch neck to keep the arc tight, where the hand rests when a shoulder tires, how to count the seconds between small dabs when the corner wants to fall. He has them pull a full seam without stopping, even when the lip at a cross member wants to catch their eye. Once, a new man opens his arc too wide and a bright hole falls through the edge. Otto taps his arm and points to the travel speed on the sheet, then makes him start again from the dead end. They keep their voices low. The overseer stands once at the end of the aisle and watches, and then walks on. The toolroom foreman calls him in to drop one of his helper pieces on the granite table. A man with a surface gauge runs a finger along the angle and measures the holes. They make a simple drawing and stamp a neutral code on it. By the next week, sets of those angle stops sit in bins with tags that do not name him, only the code. Fitters from an adjacent bay borrow 2 and bolt them onto their jig faces between lifts. No one asks to halt the line. The stops slip in while the crane is away, and the next hull comes up with the step set clean. He stands by, hands in his pockets, listening to the clamps bite and the lift slings creak, and times the gap between calls to the crane. It shrinks. The test bay opens to him now that his name is on the provisional work list. He watches presses bend coupons sawn from pilot seams until the metal folds back on itself, and the gray of the brake shows without a black seam line. He reads the destructive reports clipped to a board. Tensile keeps within range, bend holds without toe cracks, face distortion is less than the baseline. He knows what those words feel like on the floor. Fewer torch lines later, fewer jacks, fewer men leaning hard to pull a frame back to square. On a Tuesday, he walks past the rework area and counts only 2 hulls in the heat-straightened queue where 6 sat last week. A fitter he trained wipes sweat with his sleeve and puts his torch down early. The plate he would have chased all morning lies straight. Otto keeps his face still when the man looks up and nods. The rhythm of the line changes under his feet. He keeps his pocket watch in his palm and clicks at the start and end of each section while pretending to wipe grit from his eye. Where a web and bulkhead took most of a shift, the same pair now moves in half the span. The time the crane spends over the jigs drops. The lifts come and go without long hunts for an angle. The pencil marks on the Takt board fall closer together. By the end of the month, he sees the number he has been counting toward. Twice as many section sets roll past a post in a shift as before the trial started. He can hear it as much as count it. Less chipping, fewer hammer blows, more steady arcs running out to a clean close. A clerk from planning brings a roll-up sheet to the conference room and forgets to close the door when she leaves. He stands outside with a rag in his hand and reads the top line through the glass. It claims millions of man-hours saved if the method holds across quarters when scaled to the entire plant. The figure is large enough that he cannot feel all of it, only pieces. Weekends turned into days with his children for some men, more hulls on trains that others will ride behind. It is not his number on the sheet. A black bar still marks his clock card, but he knows where those hours were found. In the beats he cut from the arc and the clamps he set closer together. As the welding work clears, he sees where the new log jams jump up. His hulls stacked too deep by the machining bay, waiting on a mill head that must kiss down each hatch ring. The paint booths grow a line of primed shells with chalked names. Men from scheduling shift fitters to help mask edges, and the overseer tells him to walk the machine room once and write what he sees. He watches a planer stroke while a machinist adjusts a jib. He cannot change those cuts with a stop block, not yet. He writes one line in his small book: "Weld is not the bottleneck now." A new notice goes up by the time clock. It adopts the joint geometry for specified seams plant-wide, with a neutral title and a drawing that looks like his first pencil sketch flattened into ink. It lists approved locations and the inspection steps and carries the armament stamp. It does not carry any name. The angle stops in the bins now have a printed label with their code, and the go-no-go template hangs on a hook by every platform. Day shift foremen teach the clamp sequence as if they have always known it. He does not need his private nicks to find his seams anymore. He can see the step in how the light runs along the edge. He is told to report to a small process group on the mezzanine. The room is part desk, part floor, with a window that looks into the test bay. He gains a key to the racks where sample parts wait for press bends and saw cuts. He gets thin files that he must sign for. The same overseer who pushed the charges sits above him in the same chain and watches his time card all the same. He keeps his head down and writes short notes about heat input on thicker plates and how the step behaves at a hatch collar. He goes back to the floor at night to help a team on a corner case without leaving a trace beyond the smooth seam. He knows that one bad joint could yank all of this back into a room with a shut door. So he works as if each seam is still the one that could end him, even as the method he drew spreads beyond his hands. 12th of May, 1945. White sheets hang from crane hooks like flags. Otto unlocks a thin cabinet in the process room and slides a stack of files onto a steel table. He is a factory mechanic under a stopped line. The step he drew has made it into typed sheets and tool codes. The plant is quiet except for boots in corridors, and the scrape of chairs moved for new men with armbands who write down what they see. They come in khaki and dark blue, with cameras, notebooks, and a translator who looks at his hands when he speaks. Otto walks them past the bays that smell of old flux to the mezzanine, where the process binders live. He opens the one with the clamp order and points to the go, no-go template in its sleeve. He pulls a scrap plate from a rack and bolts the angle stop to a jig face that has not held a hull since the sirens. He sets a rebate against its mate until the dull click tells him the faces touch. He runs a short seam on the scrap with a borrowed torch, one steady pull, no breaks, while a captain takes pictures of the bead and a clerk sketches the offset. When they ask if there is more, he takes his pocket notebook out and places it by the file. The pages are soft at the edges. He watches the camera click over his pencil lines and thinks how a joint leaves a room when its shape is written in someone else's book. A summons comes with a gray stamp and his name spelled clean. He brings his ration card and a work letter to a civilian office that used to hold shipping forms. The woman at the desk slides him a long questionnaire. He writes where he was born, where he worked, what he held in the party book, which is nothing. He lists the years at the plant and the black bar on his time card that meant watch, not rank. A panel asks what he did, and he says he fit and welded and then kept jigs true. He sets his hands open on his knees. He does not speak of hours saved, only of making seams hold. At the end, a stamp puts him in a category that lets him stay and mend tools for peacetime work. He walks out with the sense that a gate has shut behind him but not on him. Weeks later, a visitor from the technical group returns with a fat binder that smells like damp paper. He sets it on the table and turns pages so Otto can see drawings that look like his, drawn in other hands, with English words he can sound out. The stepped lap seam sits on a sheet with a number. A photograph shows a clamp biting a plate next to a small shelf, and a caption notes that the shape self-locates under pressure. Another page diagrams a continuous pass and warns against stops that throw heat into corners. There is a line about time reduction and fewer straightening operations. It reads like someone watched his night shift and wrote down what it meant. There is no name where the idea began. He closes the binder and feels both seen and erased. In the months when the plant trades armor for rolled shapes and farm frames, he moves to the tool room. He learns to scrape a surface plate clean before he sets a jig on it, and to listen for a clamp that talks when a thread is wrong. The younger men bring him crooked fixtures, and he brings them back square. He stamps codes on small blocks and measures holes with a pin set until the pins fall with the right feel. Around him, the shop changes its noise. The gangs that once hung hull sides now set long beams for rail cars. He keeps the angle stops true and the templates honest. He is known as the man who makes a gauge that does not lie. No one calls him an inventor. That word does not fit how the room talks about work. Visitors still come, now in plain coats with clips on their ties. They say they are from a car works and ask if they can see how the clamp holds the step. He sets two rails on a low jig and shows them the order of the bites, the stop that prevents drift, the way the geometry holds the face flat so a weld can run in one breath. They sketch the edges and the clamp foot. Months later, he sees a picture in a translated journal of a body-on-frame line with rails that wear a small step on their inside edge. The text says that the joint reduces fixtures and lets a man pull the bead without brakes. The photograph shows a template that could be his, by shape if not by number. He turns the page and sees an index that lists stepped lap under approved practices for vehicle frames. He does not see his name in any of it. A shop copy of a civilian welding guide arrives with a stamp that says it is a licensed edition. Inside, a drawing shows a joint that looks like his first pencil sketch made tidy. The caption gives a neutral title and shows where a clamp foot lands and where the arc should start. There is a note on distortion control that matches the old pilot sheet from the plant. He runs his finger along the line and feels the old choice live on, simple, stripped of where it came from. The book belongs to the office. He signs it out and signs it back again. He carries his own lesson without a book. He teaches a new apprentice to set the work so that the shape itself wants to sit right, and to make the weld run once steady, so that heat does not fight the line. When a flange pulls, he shows where to cool, not where to beat. He tells the lad to spend time at the seam before he spends time at the bench later. He does not talk about tanks. He talks about cranes that wait and men who do not have to wait for them, because a joint held itself under a clamp. He keeps his pocket watch in the drawer but still counts in his head between the start and the close, because the habit is now his trade. Years pass. The shop hums with peacetime orders. He comes in clean and goes home with the same hands, only slower. Sometimes a magazine lies on the lunch table with pictures from far plants where lines move like water. He sees rails with small steps, gussets that sit on little shelves, fixtures that bite and hold without fuss. He recognizes the idea in their edges even when the words are new. The men at the table talk about throughput and how a day's tally jumped after a small jig arrived. He listens and nods and wipes his hands on a rag. He does not get a medal or a mention in print. He retires out of the tool room with a set of files he has kept sharp and a bench that sits level. The files go to a boy who will learn to feel when a surface is flat. In other places, far from his town, cars leave lines faster because a seam asks less of the man who makes it. The step he cut once in a dark bay lives on in forms that carry its cause without his name, and the pace of those lines ties his quiet choice to the noise of the world beyond his own floor. He watched the joint stay because it held under an inspector's eye and under the press, and he lived because a sealed circular reached the room when he most needed it. The step he cut in the dark became a rule on the bay, and then a habit in other shops he knew only from binders and pictures. So the hours he took back from cranes and slag ran on past his name. And the weight of it stayed with the man at the clamp who chose once to break a line on a drawing, a choice that left him at a bench while lines far from him learned to move.